which is I suppose in the context of social networks, maybe sort of digital content kind of generally, the kind of definitions around B2B and B2C are clearly hugely changing. It's not just a simple case of one is mass market, one is a bit more niche market. And I think what I'd very much like you to do is just kind of, if you could introduce yourself and also kind of explore definitions of B2C and B2B as you're doing so, in terms of what it means for you, what the relevance is to your business, and so on.
Can we start?
Whoever wants to start.
I'll start this end. Okay, I'm John Barnes. I'm MD Digital at Incisive Media. I'm standing in for Tim Weller today. He sadly has to attend a funeral for a close colleague of ours who died very recently. Otherwise, he would have been here himself. However, we share a pretty similar view on things. I've been doing the job for about 3 years at Incisive Media. We're a company that has sort of 3 areas of the market: face-to-face, print, and online. Online historically very small. When I started 3 years ago, probably under 10% of the revenue. The objective we've got is to try and make it a balanced portfolio of products, 30, 30, 30, 33, 33. So, what does B2B mean to me? It's probably easier than saying how does B2C differ. And I think what I would say, with a background in B2B publishing for probably nearly 20 years, is that it's historically been very much about a narrow cast model. It's therefore identifying a type or focused audience where you're providing a focused, relevant, useful, high-value content proposition to that audience. And I think it's very much in the context of a B2B publisher like Incisive, understanding what the role, the function, the value, and the importance of that individual that you're trying to focus to, so that we can then sell that access and that profile onto the advertiser. And we would say that we've kind of, like some publishers, lost sight of that in some of our markets because we've been chasing eyeballs, not chasing profiles. And that's how I would define it.
Great. Kevin Ayers, I'm the Managing Director for LinkedIn in Europe. And the way that we look at it is actually somewhat similar, but also want to put a slightly different twist on things. I think that, that fundamentally it comes down to value and not losing sight of humans involved in this. So we talk about B2B, it really is B2B. It's a business person purchasing from another business person, but on behalf of their company. I think many times we lose sight of that, and we see a lot of people gaining a lot of value by talking about LinkedIn is a place where you establish your professional profile. So we'd have this view on this, but companies leveraging their best asset, which is their employees, in order to make that more personal connection back and forth with whoever the purchaser is going to be. So I'm sure with you guys, who have you had the most deep relationship with when you're buying from a company?
Yeah.
Is it the company or is it the actual person that you're dealing with? So I think it's not losing sight of that. The other thing is around the value proposition that you have. And why do people fundamentally want to register with your site and not just use it freely and give you no information other than what you can see by behavior targeting? It's about the value that you provide back to them. And that's where I think that when we start looking at these different sites, the intersection of B2B coming to B2C, it really all comes down to value. And I think most of the B2B sites have been giving more clearly defined value that's highly differentiated, where the B2C sites is more of typically commodity, where you can get a lot of the same information in multiple places. And for us, we take that value in terms of data. And it's not just the data that the individuals give, it's also the data that we observe just by different connections, and it's the power of harnessing all that data together through a network. So, network effect, millions of people, we have 80 million people now. One example of that is what we call our Career Explorer, where when somebody comes to LinkedIn, they want to see, I want to get to, I want to be the VP of someplace, and I've just graduated from university. How am I going to get there? Then they harness the information of everybody else at LinkedIn, and we'll show them the typical path that people have taken and the different career moves they need to take. And so that's what I mean about providing value back. And because value is provided back, they're willing to give a lot more data to us. There's also a responsibility, we can talk about responsibility of publishers with regard to that data, but that's a significant piece as well. As more people are providing data, then we have a real responsibility to protect that data.
Okay, I'm Tim Potter. I run all of Centaur's magazines, websites, and events, really focused, conference events, things like that, focused at the business-to-business markets. And I think what I think you've got to be very careful of in terms of looking at the differences between B2C and B2B is, I'm not sure there is a huge difference. I think we thought there was when we first moved to the web, and lots of us set up websites with registration barriers in place because we thought we'll just simply replicate what we did with controlled circulation magazines. Quite rapidly, I think we realised that what we delivered with controlled circulation magazines was the total relevant audience. That was the guarantee. That was the disruptive technology, if you like, of its time. It took out a lot of subscription-based titles because we delivered a much bigger audience. Of course, by putting a registration barrier in place, we effectively did to ourselves what we allowed the web, other competitors, to come in and deliver a much broader audience. So I think most sites then took out registration. There's obviously a big debate now about how we put registration back in. But I think we've got to be very careful about how we put registration back in. I think you're right, we need to collect appropriate data for appropriate purposes, but there is a value deal there. We can't expect people simply to give us data simply for access to all of our content. I just think that's not going to work. So I think there's a much more sophisticated challenge there, perhaps, than we've recognised in the past. And I think we need to gradually build up a picture of our business-to-business audience through recording all the different transactions we have with the audience, and that means a different approach to technology and various other things within the business. But that's critical, I think, to understanding how we might proceed. And I think that probably is a very similar challenge to the challenge I face if I was sitting in a B2C company. So I think the differences are probably a lot less now than they were 10 years ago.
Great.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike Butcher, sitting on. I actually worked at Centaur a few years ago. I remember sitting, what's the owner's name? Graham Sharon. I remember sitting in a meeting with Graham Sharon once saying, it's all very well, but I hope you're not selling the front page too cheaply. Marvellous, where was the value? I don't know. I started off at Haymarket Publishing, working on a now defunct magazine called Newspaper Focus, writing about volatile organic compounds and inks, which in printing presses, which is great fun. And then worked at Centaur back in the mid-90s when nobody knew what the internet was, and we thought it was basically a telecoms kind of play. And I worked on New Media Age magazine, and then eventually became the editor and had great fun during the dot-com boom. And so I went through the kind of process of that newsletter thing, where, you know, high-value content, and it's £12,000 a year or something, to effectively much more a magazine model. I remember my editor nearly cutting my head off for putting a picture in the newsletter, because that suddenly turned the thing into a less of a valuable proposition for some reason. Even though, to be honest with you, at the time, people really wanted to recognise who the hell the people were in their industry. And I think what's actually happened, especially because of the internet, is that as John was saying, it's come from a sort of an inch wide to a mile deep kind of registration. You know who your readers are, that kind of controlled circulation model, all the way up to whacking out on the web, and we don't know, chasing eyeballs, and he's trying to balance his business. Well, I now work, after a few years working with publishing companies like Media Week and Press Gazette, and freelancing for the FT and The Guardian, ended up at TechCrunch, and TechCrunch.com, which is a big title with 10 million unique views a month and 30 million page impressions a month, and we just sold to AOL a couple of weeks ago for bazillion dollars, whatever it was. Nobody knows. I don't know. So, and what we did was we didn't chase kind of registration. We don't really know who our readers are a lot of the time. A lot of them would leave rather kind of rude comments on our blog posts. But what we chased was communities. And I think that's kind of one of the key issues. If you look at what publishers have done, historically, in the first instance, what they did was, and I'm talking in the 18th century here, is that they chased communities. They didn't necessarily know who their communities, have data about the communities, but they chased them and they enlivened those communities. And then publishing went into other modes like the registration thing and other things. And I think where blog publishers are, effectively that's what we are, and now we're part of the AOL network, is that we're chasing these communities. And TechCrunch was bought for this high-value community, economists reading, venture capitalists, startup entrepreneurs who, yeah, sure, they'll want to know what the latest iPhone does, but they also want to know, what's the business models and how do they get value and do their businesses. So that's kind of my opening gambit, I guess.
Great. I've got a couple of questions, but does anyone want to chip in and ask questions of the panel?